Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Thank you. It's great to be here for this one.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So, okay, I want you, the listener, to imagine you are standing on a riverbank. It's a hot, unforgiving season, and suddenly the ground starts to shake.
Just completely terrifying.
Right. You look up, and there is a multi-ton elephant charging directly toward you. And it's not looking at you. It doesn't hate you. It isn't harboring some, deep-seated malice against your existence.
It just wants the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is simply thirsty and needs the water behind you, and you happen to be standing right in the way of its massive feet.
It's such a visceral image.
It is. And that terrifying image isn't just the thought experiment. It is the core dilemma at the heart of an incredible stack of ancient textual fragments we were doing a deep dive into today. We're looking at scraps of parchment that have survived, thousands of years, originating from classic Eastern fables.
Right, these very old fragmented stories.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because these aren't just quaint stories about animals. These fragments give us a dramatic, almost chilling window into power, survival, and leadership. We have fragments describing a royal court populated by very specific advisors.
And that devastating event with the Elephant King.
Yes, a massive Elephant King and his herd, driven by a brutal dry season, and they just crush the heads, necks of rabbits who live on those banks.
It's pretty dark.
It is. And then we see a desperate appeal made to the moon. And finally, we have a mysterious, lingering dispute involving a partridge.
It's a really remarkable collection to piece together. And that opening image you just painted, that's exactly where the gravity of this text lies.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you synthesize these tiny broken sentences, what emerges is a profound, almost surgical blueprint for how the vulnerable can survive overwhelming power.
Which is something we all kind of need to know, right?
Oh, absolutely. But equally, it is an indictment of how leaders, whether ancient kings navigating a physical court or modern executives steering multinational corporations, how they systematically blind themselves to both internal and external threats.
I mean, it is fundamentally a text about the catastrophic consequences of being oblivious.
That's the perfect word for it, oblivious.
And that concept of being oblivious is why we're taking this deep dive today. I want to invite you, the listener, into these ancient power dynamics. I want you to think about your own life, your workplace, your family structure, your community. Where do you fit into this story?
Are you the rabbit trying to survive?
Right. Or are you the elephant charging forward, unaware of the damage you're causing? Or are you the king who cannot see what is happening right in front of you?
That's a heavy question to sit with.
So let's start with the most striking image in these texts. The core wisdom here really revolves around the sheer destructive nature of oblivious power. The fragments give us vivid, almost reverent descriptions of this Elephant King. We read phrases detailing the beauty of twisting trunks, the presence of two tusks, and this intoxicating flow of honey.
Which is fascinating, the focus on its majesty.
Yeah. But positioned directly next to that majesty is the brutal reality of the, quote, heads, necks of rabbits who live on the banks, unquote, just being annihilated.
Just completely crushed.
And then abruptly, the author introduces a completely different kind of threat, a political warning about an enemy in our ranks acting as a second king.
Right, which is a massive shift in tone.
It really is. It makes me wonder if the Elephant King is like a massive corporation or some systemic force, like an economic recession or a sweeping technological change. It crushes small entities, the rabbits, without any malicious intent.
Right, it crushes them simply because it is large and it is moving.
Exactly. So how does the author contrast that with the highly intentional threat of the enemy in our ranks?
What's fascinating here is the text's brilliant differentiation between two fundamental types of danger that every person and every organization faces. I mean, the author is mapping out the architecture of ruin.
Okay, the architecture of ruin, I like that.
Let's look closely at the language surrounding the external threat, the elephant herd during a dry season. The text explicitly focuses on the aesthetic and physical mass of the elephant. The beauty of twisting trunks, the intimidating presence of two tusks.
It sounds so grand.
It does. But the elephant isn't marching to the banks to wage a targeted ideological war against the rabbits. The elephant is simply thirsty. It is experiencing its own crisis, its own dry season, and in its desperation and sheer unmitigated size, it causes absolute devastation.
So the tragedy really lies in the indifference. The elephant isn't actively plotting the demise of the rabbits. It's entirely consumed by its own need.
Precisely the point the ancient author is making. Power operates without awareness of the collateral damage it creates, unless it is forced to look.
Right.
And that is a terrifying reality of how massive systems work today. A corporate restructuring doesn't happen because the board of directors harbors a personal vendetta against, like, the middle management team in a specific regional office.
Yeah, they're not sitting around saying, how do we ruin John's Tuesday?
Exactly. The massive market shift doesn't happen because it wants to destroy a local family business. The giant doesn't hate you. It just doesn't see you.
But then the text flips the script to show us the second type of threat.
Right. We have these chilling fragments warning of an enemy in our ranks who acts as a second king, someone the true leaders, quote, do not see.
Which is entirely different from the elephant.
Completely. This is internal, calculated sabotage. It is quiet, it is intentional, and it is born of ambition rather than blind necessity.
So it's the difference between a natural disaster and an assassin.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Well, if you are a leader or just a person navigating a complex social structure, you have to develop a sort of dual vision. Because if you only obsess over the assassin, the rival in your office, the competitor trying to steal your clients,
you get wiped out by the natural disaster, the massive shift in the industry that you just weren't paying attention to.
Right. And if you only watch the horizon for the massive structural changes, the unseen rival in your own ranks quietly usurps your position.
That dual vision is the absolute prerequisite for enduring leadership. You have to be aware of the collateral damage your own massive movements might be causing to those beneath you, while simultaneously remaining deeply, uncomfortably vigilant about the insidious, quiet threats within your own inner circle.
Because danger doesn't always announce itself with a declaration of war.
Right. Often it comes from someone else's desperate need to survive a dry season, or from an unseen rival quietly building power in the shadows, waiting for the moment to become that second king.
Which gives us a perfect entry point into the actual anatomy of this ancient court. These fragments don't just talk about power in the abstract. They list the specific officials who manage it.
Yeah, the roles are very specific.
We see the advisor, the master of ceremonies, or as the broken parchment literally reads, Ter of Seri, the treasurer, the war minister, the favorite, and the forester.
A very detailed list for a fragment.
It is. We also have these fascinating snippets about being reminded of all duties of a king and matters that are, quote, pious as holy, which clearly points to pious and holy obligation.
Yes, the moral weight of leadership.
But, I have to push back a little on this ancient setup. Why on earth could an ancient court place a master of ceremonies and a favorite on the exact same hierarchical level as the war minister and the treasurer?
It does seem strange to our modern eyes.
Right. When we think of ancient kings surviving in a brutal, conquest-driven world, we think of ruthless tacticians. We think of logistics, supply lines, and military might. Elevating the person who plans the royal banquets and the king's personal best friend to the highest levels of statecraft seems like a recipe for a weak, unserious kingdom.
Well, it seems that way to us because it reveals a lot about our modern biases regarding power. We tend to view leadership and organization purely through the lens of utility and efficiency.
Sure, metrics and KPIs.
Exactly. We value the treasurer because they manage the capital and the war minister because they manage the force. We see the mechanics of the state as paramount, assuming that hard power is the only power that matters.
But the author is arguing something different.
What this ancient text understands, and what is arguably still entirely true today, even if it doesn't show up on a modern corporate org chart, is that power is highly ritualized and deeply intrinsically personal.
I see the ritual aspect, sure, pomp and circumstance, project authority. But how does the favorite manage power? A favorite implies someone who is there just because the leader likes them, not because they offer any, strategic value.
Oh, but the strategic value of the favorite is psychological preservation. Think about the mental burden of absolute leadership in an ancient court.
I imagine it's pretty heavy.
It is profoundly isolating. It is paranoid. You are constantly watching for that second king who wants to poison your wine or bribe your guards. While the treasurer and the war minister handle the external mechanics of the kingdom, the master of ceremonies and the favorite manage the internal optics and the psychological comfort of the ruler.
Huh. That's a really interesting way to look at it.
The master of ceremonies controls the narrative. They dictate how power is perceived by the public and the nobility. If a king looks weak during a ceremony, if the rituals are sloppy, He invites rebellion, no matter how many soldiers the war minister has. Perception is the vanguard of reality.
So they are effectively the ancient equivalent of the director of PR and communications, managing the brand of the monarchy.
Yes, exactly. And the favorite is the leader's psychological pressure valve. The favorite provides unconditional loyalty in a room full of people who view the king strictly as a means to an end.
Because everyone else wants something.
Right. The treasurer wants funding, the war minister wants troops. The favorite just wants the king to be happy. Now, king is relying on a favorite dangerous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is the fatal flaw of many historical regimes.
Right, because it breeds yes men.
Exactly. But it is a deeply embedded aspect of human nature. Leaders want to feel safe. And this brings us to those fragments about being reminded of all the duties of a king, specifically the pious holy ones.
Because a king who only listens to a yes-man favorite and a heavily armed war minister is on a fast track to tyranny, the blind spots become institutionalized.
This is why the role of the advisor is so critical in this list. Leadership in the ancient world wasn't just administrative, it carried a profound, sacred weight. The king was responsible for the moral and cosmic order of the realm, the pious holy duties.
So someone had to be the conscience.
Yes. The role of the true advisor in this court structure was likely to keep the king reminded of these heavy moral obligations. The fundamental tension of the court is right there in the fragments.
You have the advisor pulling the king toward moral duty, restraint, and reality.
While the favorite is pulling the king toward comfort, ego, and whatever the king simply wants to hear. If the favorite wins that tug of war, the king becomes oblivious, the flow of honey distracts him, and he ends up becoming the elephant, crushing the rabbits on the riverbank without even noticing.
Wow. Okay, so what does this all mean for someone navigating the modern world? I mean, most people listening aren't sitting on a literal throne weighing the advice of a master of ceremonies against a war minister. But we can take this ancient power dynamic and map it onto the 21st century. This brings us to the most poignant part of the fragments, the rabbit's desperation.
Yes, the rabbit's plea.
We have this incredible section where the rabbit is looking at this absolute destruction and says, quote, "It is true, Moon. Who will defy him? Pray tell what I must do."
It's just so sad and helpless.
And then another fragment showing this feeling of loss and missing out, quote, "Abundant I missed, does not my," unquote. It's a profound sense of powerlessness.
It really is.
So if you are a mid-level employee, the rabbit in this scenario, how do you deal with a CEO, a massive corporation, or a faceless market shift that acts exactly like this oblivious elephant? When pure physical force or financial leverage just isn't an option for you, how do you fight back without getting crushed?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what the rabbit is doing here is outlining the foundational strategy of asymmetrical problem solving. It's a masterclass in dealing with overwhelming power when you have absolutely none.
Okay, asymmetrical problem solving. Tell me more.
The rabbit looks at the elephant with its two tusks and its sheer mass and realizes immediately, I cannot outmuscle this.
Right. If I try to fight the elephant on its own terms, using physical force or direct confrontation, I will simply be in addition to the casualty list. More heads, more necks crushed.
Exactly. So what does the rabbit do? It doesn't appeal to a slightly larger animal. It appeals to a higher, entirely unassailable authority. It appeals to the moon.
The moon. It's a beautiful, poetic image, but I want to ground this. What is the actual mechanism of appealing to the moon in a modern context? How does a powerless entity leverage an unassailable authority?
In the 21st century, the moon represents any form of leverage that exists completely outside the immediate physical or financial power dynamic you were trapped in. When you lack size, you have to find altitude.
Find altitude. I love that.
Appealing to the moon today means leveraging systems, optics, or values that the elephant cannot touch or destroy, but is still subject to.
Give me an example of that.
For instance, appealing to the moon might mean bringing in regulatory bodies. A massive corporation can crush a small supplier financially, but it cannot crush a federal antitrust regulator.
Right, because they operate on a different plane entirely.
Exactly. The moon might be the media or public relations. A CEO might ignore a mid-level employee's complaints, but they cannot ignore a viral expose that threatens the company's stock price.
Or it could be leveraging the company's own stated values. I mean, if an organization claims in all its marketing to value sustainability or employee well-being, and their actions are destroying the metaphorical riverbank, you use their own pious, holy rhetoric against them.
You hold their actions up to the light of the moon they claim to worship. That's a perfect way to phrase it. The mechanism of asymmetrical leverage is finding the fulcrum that moves the giant.
Because the elephant can uproot a tree, it can drain a river, but it cannot reach up and touch the moon.
Yet the moon controls the tides. The moon has systemic power over the water that the thirsty elephant so desperately needs. It's also about collective action. One rabbit is easily crushed. But a union of rabbits appealing to labor laws changes the dynamic entirely.
The text is teaching the vulnerable not to fight force with force, but to fight force with systemic leverage.
Precisely.
Let's look at this from the other side, though, because as much as we all want to identify with the rabbit, the text is also asking us to evaluate our own behavior during our own modern dry season.
Yes, we aren't always the rabbit.
When we face economic downturns, mass layoffs, inflation, or just intense personal stress, we have to navigate that without becoming the panic-stricken elephant that crushes our own colleagues. When resources get scarce, when things are no longer abundant, as the fragment says, human beings have a terrible tendency to put their heads down and charge toward the water.
We really do. The dry season strips away our peripheral vision. That is the true danger. When a leader, or even a peer, feels their own survival is threatened, the nuanced counsel of the advisor is often drowned out by the primal need for the flow of honey.
The quick win. The immediate relief.
Right, self-preservation, and in that panic sprint, the vulnerable always suffer first.
Okay, I want to get really granular here for the listener. We have these incredible metaphors, but I want a specific actionable playbook. Let's say a listener is facing an overwhelming obstacle today, or maybe they are locked in a bitter dispute.
Which brings in those final fragments about the partridge?
Yes, we had this mysterious snippet, quote, "us ask our gnat," unquote, which clearly implies let us ask our natural. And then another fragment, quote, "you take the day partridge," unquote, pointing to a dispute involving a partridge.
The dispute.
Based on everything we've unpacked, what is the practical step-by-step application of this ancient wisdom for someone listening to this right now?
Let's break it down into 3 specific applications: a practice, a reflection, and a question. First, the practice. And this comes directly from the partridge dispute. When you are locked in a bitter conflict with someone, whether it's a coworker, a business partner, or a family member, and neither side is backing down, you have to apply the advice of that fragment. Let us ask our natural judge or mediator.
So bringing in a third party.
Yes. The practice here is intentionally stepping outside the binary fight. When 2 parties are just hammering at each other, ego takes over. You are no longer fighting for a solution, you are fighting to not lose.
Right, it just becomes a war of attrition.
The psychology of a binary conflict is a trap. You have to actively seek an objective third-party perspective, a natural arbiter who has no stake in the fight and no emotional baggage attached to the outcome. Stop trying to win the argument by blunt force and mutually agree to submit the argument to a neutral moon, so to speak. It diffuses the ego and recenters the conflict on objective reality.
That makes total sense for a dispute. You have to introduce a circuit breaker to stop the endless loop of retaliation. But what about the power dynamics? What's the takeaway for the elephant and the rabbit?
That leads to the reflection. I want every listener to take a hard, honest look at their life and ask, am I acting like the elephant king in my family, my community, or my workplace? We all suffer from the illusion that we are the underdog rabbit.
Oh, 100%. It's the most comfortable narrative to inhabit. I'm always the good guy in my own story.
Exactly. But the reality is, in certain contexts, we have more power than we realize. Are you so focused on enjoying your own flow of honey, your own comfort, career trajectory, and success that you don't see who is doing the heavy lifting beneath you? Or, conversely, are you so panicked by your own personal dry season?
Your stress, your deadlines, your financial worries?
That you are charging ahead, causing collateral damage to those who have less power than you. Think about the mid-level manager who is terrified of missing a quarterly target. In their panic, they demand unreasonable hours from their junior team, snap at the administrative staff, and create a toxic environment.
They feel like a victim of the dry season, but to their team, they are the massive elephant crushing everything in their path.
Exactly.
That requires a very uncomfortable level of self-awareness because it's so easy to justify our destructive actions when we feel like we are in a dry season. We rationalize it. We tell ourselves, I'm just trying to survive. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I'm under a lot of pressure right now.
But the text doesn't care about the elephant's stress level.
The rabbit's neck is still broken regardless of your intentions.
That's it. The brutal truth of power dynamics is that intent does not mitigate impact when there is a massive power differential. Your pure intentions do not heal the rabbit.
Oof. That's a hard truth.
It is. Which brings us to the third application, the question regarding counsel. Look back at that list of the King's Court. I want you to evaluate the people you intentionally surround yourself with, both personally and professionally.
So looking at your inner circle.
Ask yourself, who is the true advisor in my life? Who is the person brave enough to remind me of my pious, holy duties, my ethics, my core values, even when I am panicked or acting out of self-interest? And crucially, who is merely the favorite?
Right, who is just the yes man?
Who is the person just enabling my worst instincts, soothing my ego, and telling me I'm entirely justified when I'm actually acting like a destructive elephant? If you look at your inner circle and realize it is populated entirely by favorites who never push back on your narrative, you are in deep trouble.
Because you have built an echo chamber that will eventually lead you right into a blind spot.
Exactly.
Practice finding the mediator, reflect on your own elephant-like behavior, and question whether you are surrounded by true advisors or just enabling favorites. Those are incredibly sharp tools.
Very practical.
But I have to say, looking at all this, engaging with this text is profoundly uncomfortable. Modern culture loves a clean, fair narrative. We love movies where the underdog wins through sheer heart, moral superiority, and determination. We love stories where the bad guy is obviously like mustache-twirlingly evil and gets his comeuppance.
The Marvel movie version of reality.
Exactly. We really do not like thinking about a world where innocent rabbits get their heads and necks crushed simply because an elephant was thirsty. And we have that fragment about curiosity leading, quote, to my unquote, implying that even innocent childlike curiosity can lead to sudden destruction. It's incredibly bleak. We want the world to be a safe place where good things happen to good people.
It is bleak, and it is entirely natural to feel a deep psychological resistance to this text. We desperately want to believe in a world where meritocracy always wins out. We want to believe that human resources departments, or the justice system, or sheer hard work will always protect us from being crushed. We want to believe the universe is inherently fair and balances the scales. Acknowledging this text means acknowledging that the systems we rely on are often completely indifferent to our individual survival.
But the fragments don't care about our desire for fairness. They don't offer a comforting platitude.
No, they don't. The ancient author demands that we face a brutal, unfiltered reality. Massive systems, whether they're literal elephants, multinational corporations, or bureaucratic governments, destroy the vulnerable simply by operating.
Right. The destruction isn't a glitch in the system.
It is often a byproduct of the system's existence. Now, acknowledging this isn't about surrendering to cynicism. It is a vital prerequisite for survival. If the rabbit believes the jungle is a safe, fair place where thirsty elephants will politely step around it because it has a right to be on the riverbank, the rabbit dies.
The rabbit's survival depends on its ability to see the world exactly as it is, not as it wishes it to be. You have to diagnose the reality of the power dynamics to navigate them successfully.
Absolutely.
And what about the internal threat? Because that makes me just as uncomfortable, if not more so. We want to trust our colleagues. We want to believe our team is a family, that we are all pulling in the same direction. But the text insists on this intense, almost paranoid vigilance.
The enemy in our ranks. The unseen second king.
Yeah, that part.
Yes. This is another massive obstacle for modern sensibilities. We are taught to be collaborative, to be open, to practice vulnerable leadership, and to trust the team unconditionally. And, collaboration is a wonderful, necessary thing for innovation. But this ancient wisdom insists that we must retain a baseline level of political shrewdness.
Meaning you can't be totally naive.
Right. You can be collaborative while still keeping your eyes wide open to human ambition. Refusing to see the potential for a second king to rise up and usurp you, or to destroy your project from the inside because their ambition doesn't align with your goals, isn't a sign of moral superiority. The text implies it's a sign of dangerous naivety.
Because human nature contains both the capacity for deep loyalty and the capacity for ruthless ambition. A leader must be equipped to handle both.
Precisely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as much as I'm on board with seeing the world clearly and ditching the naive fairy tales, we do have to use some discernment here. We are interpreting ancient fragments, and we can't just blindly adopt the ethics of an ancient absolute monarchy without running it through a modern filter.
That's a very fair point.
Take the concept of the favor we talked about. The text presents it as a structural reality, an accepted role in the court alongside the treasurer. Should a modern leader actually cultivate an official favorite? I mean, is there any world where having a designated yes man is ethical or effective today? And what about the rabbit? The rabbit says, quote, "It is true, Moon," unquote, essentially claiming to speak for this higher power to intimidate the elephant. Isn't the rabbit just using manipulation and outright deception to survive? Is that an ethical playbook we want to hand to listeners today? Like, hey, if you outgun, just lie and manipulate the system.
This raises an important question about how we filter ancient wisdom. We cannot swallow it whole, nor should we dismiss it entirely because it comes from a different moral framework. We have to extract the underlying mechanism while evaluating the ethics. Let's take the favorite first.
Okay, let's look at the favorite.
The ancient court structurally accepted nepotism, favoritism, and cronyism. A king's power was absolute, so his personal whims were institutionalized. In a modern democratic workplace or society, we must firmly, unequivocally reject the practice of having favorites. Structurally, it is disastrous.
Right. It breeds intense resentment. It destroys merit-based advancement. It creates a toxic culture, and it inevitably leads to horrific decision-making.
If a modern CEO has a blatant favorite who bypasses the whole executive team and influences major company strategy just because, they play golf together, the culture rots, the top talent leaves, the stock plummets, and the board revolts, the practice is toxic in a modern context.
So why are we learning from it?
Because while we reject the practice, we must deeply understand the psychology behind it that the text is highlighting. Because that psychology hasn't changed in thousands of years.
The need for psychological preservation.
Yes. Leaders, being human, will always naturally gravitate toward those who offer unconditional loyalty, flattery, and comfort over those who offer hard, friction-filled truths. It is a biological drive to seek safety and validation. If you are a leader, you have to actively fight your own ancient urge to create an informal favorite.
Because the moment you surround yourself with comfort, you dangerously insulate yourself from your war minister or your truth-telling advisor. You blind yourself to the reality of your own organization.
So the wisdom isn't get a favorite, it's understand your desperate psychological craving for a favorite and fight it.
I love that distinction. And what about our clever little rabbit? Is deception justified if you're about to be stepped on? Does the end justify the means when the stakes are existential?
That is the profound ethical gray area of asymmetric warfare, and it's a question that philosophers have debated for centuries. The rabbit is facing total existential annihilation by an oblivious giant. The elephant isn't playing by the rules of engagement, it's just walking.
Right, it doesn't even know there's a game.
In that extreme scenario, the text suggests that cunning, leveraging optics, and perhaps even a degree of deception, pretending to speak for the moon to terrify a superstitious or cautious elephant, is a valid survival mechanism.
But is it ethical?
It asks the listener a very hard question. When the power imbalance is that extreme, do the normal rules of fair play and absolute honesty still apply? Does morality require you to be completely honest with the boot that is about to crush your neck?
If a massive corporation is using legal loopholes and predatory pricing to bankrupt your small business, do you have a moral obligation to fight them using only pristine conventional methods that guarantee your destruction? Or do you leverage PR, create a media narrative, and perhaps bluff your way into a regulatory investigation to survive?
The text doesn't give a neat, comforting answer. It doesn't wrap the ethical dilemma in a bow. It simply shows what the rabbit had to do to survive in the face of absolute, indifferent power.
It forces every listener to decide exactly where their personal moral line is drawn when their back is against the metaphorical riverbank and the dry season has arrived.
Which is an intense thing to wrestle with.
It really is, and it makes me marvel at the sheer format of this text. It's fascinating that to talk about these incredibly high-stakes, life-or-death topics, treason, the deep psychology of state council, the ethics of mass casualty, and the moral gray areas of survival. These ancient authors didn't write a dry philosophical treatise. They didn't write a textbook on political science.
No, they didn't.
They used stories about a squabbling partridge, a thirsty elephant, and a terrified rabbit.
They used the animal kingdom as a proxy, which is a hallmark of the most enduring global wisdom traditions. When you look across different cultures and eras, whether it's Aesop's fables in ancient Greece, or the Native American trickster tales of the coyote, or the West African stories of Anansi the spider, you see the exact same brilliant psychological mechanism at work.
Why do we do that? Why do human beings need animals to explain our own behavior to us? Why couldn't the author just write a direct letter to the king saying, hey, watch out for the second king and listen to your advisor?
Because defensive creatures. Our egos have massive immune systems designed to reject criticism.
Oh, definitely.
If this text was a direct lecture, if it said, "Hey, king, you are arrogant, you are oblivious, you are listening to sycophants, and your policies are murdering the poor," the king wouldn't experience a moment of profound self-reflection. The king would simply execute the author. The human ego would immediately raise its shields, justify its actions, and attack the messenger. By mapping these complex, hypersensitive political realities, the roles of the treasurer, the war minister, the advisor, onto the herd of the jungle, ancient wisdom traditions brilliantly bypass our defensive perimeters.
It's the Trojan horse for truth. You let the story into your mind because it just looks like a harmless wooden horse, a cute story about animals.
Precisely. If the arrogant, destructive, oblivious figure is an elephant, we can safely observe those flaws from a distance. We can judge the elephant without feeling judged ourselves. We can laugh at the elephant's clumsiness or marvel at the rabbit's trickery without feeling personally attacked.
But once the story is inside our minds, once the Trojan horse is within the city walls of our ego, the realization slowly dawns.
I am the elephant. I am the rabbit. I am the king who cannot see the enemy in the ranks. The fable provides a safe psychological distance for us to confront our darkest, most difficult realities without triggering our immediate instinct to deny them. It sneaks the truth past our pride.
And that realization is exactly what I want to leave you with today. We've unpacked a massive amount of ancient insight and examined some very uncomfortable truths about power, survival, the blindness of leaders, and the ethical gray areas of fighting back.
It's a lot to process.
So as you step away from this deep dive and go back to your day, your workplace, or your family, I want you to look at your own life right now. Which role are you currently playing? Are you the rabbit scrambling on the banks, desperate for a way to appeal to the moon because the forces moving against you are simply too large to fight head on?
Or are you the elephant?
Are you the massive elephant, blindly charging toward what you need, completely consumed by your own dry season, and entirely oblivious to the next you might be stepping on to get to the water? Are you the partridge, locked in a bitter, ego-driven dispute and desperately needing to step back and seek a natural judge before you destroy the relationship entirely?
Or are you the king?
Comfortable in your flow of honey, listening only to your favorites who tell you what you want to hear, while remaining completely blind to the rival slowly rising in your own ranks. Recognizing which character you are playing right now, in this very moment, is the first step to changing how your story ends. That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.